Hey, look, somebody asked me a question. I better answer it.
Hey, it's Aaron from Aaron on Autos again. This time, this is the second question for today and the last of them. I was asked by Justin McGill. I was asked a question that made me realize it's one of those things that because I work in this every day, it's a question that made me realize that what I know as kind of common knowledge inherent is not necessarily common knowledge for regular people. Because, I'm special. No, but really, this was a question that made me realize that not everybody understands this, because they're just not familiar. This isn't what they do. So the question Justin had was, why do car companies make a new model every year? That's an interesting question because we take it for granted that there's a 2018, 2019, 2020, right? We take it for granted that the models are separated like that, with a few exceptions, such as with the Tesla models and stuff like that. So the answer is because of history. Model years are a convention. So they're not always an indication that anything is new. A 2018 model in 2019 might be exactly the same. There might be very little or no difference at all. It just depends on what the manufacturer is doing. Before the 1940s, though, most vehicles were introduced with a model name, and they didn't really change at all until they had a significant upgrade of some kind, and then they were given a new model name. So if you think of Ford with the Model A and the Model T, those cars for all that time that they were made were pretty much the same. They didn't change much. Same with Citroën 2 Chevaux, if you're familiar with the 2CV. Same thing. It was almost exactly the same for a long time. That car was produced for decades. I forget the exact years. It's one of my favorite cars, by the way. Sometime in the 1950s, automakers were designing a new car every single year. So they were literally making a brand new vehicle every year. And they realized that rebranding those model names, so at this point they had moved from calling things stuff like the 3, the A, the T, the whatever. They had moved to giving them names like Monte Carlo and what debuted in the 50s? It was a Corvette came out in the 50s. The Bel Air was in the 50s, I believe. The Challenger, the Charger, I mean, and all these vehicles, the Rambler, all those stuff. All these, they started using regular names, and regular names are hard to come by because there are only so many words in one language that are identifiable with people. And further, there are only so many of those words that are indicative of what you want to portray with a car. So, if you have a pickup truck, you don't want to call it the wuss, right? That's very counterproductive. So you want to have a good name for it, right? It's got to have a roll. It's got to sound powerful and good and muscular, right? So those names are limited. And so companies started trademarking. And when you trademark and you start building a brand, you start making that name mean something to people, that costs money, takes time, and a lot of effort. Coca-Cola didn't become the name for soda in a large part of this country by accident. It took a lot of concerted effort to brand that cola name. So what that means is that in automotive, they started branding, which means the same models started continuing year on year on year, even with changes. They were changing it, but still calling it the same thing. We still see that now. We see vehicles reborn. The Ranger just came back. The Blazer just came back. We're seeing the Trailblazer coming back soon. Things like that. These are models that disappeared and now they're coming back. So what happened was car makers got into this convention of not only keeping the same model and keeping that model roughly the same, in terms of the market it was aiming for and that sort of thing. They kept those branding aspects, and then they built on that. Because you can't just build the same car over and over and over. You could get away with that in the 20s, but you couldn't get away with that in the 50s and 60s. So what happened was they fell into this sort of a groove, kind of a they fell into this timeline for automotive. And before I explain that, I want to explain one other thing. Model years are also very important because small changes that maybe weren't announced, small things like back in the day when I owned a 1980s Corolla, the year that I owned, that 1984, was the year that they changed something in the oil filter. So the oil filter size was different. If I bought a 1984 Corolla oil filter, I would actually get the wrong one because my car was a half-year car. I had a 1984.5, which meant I had to buy the oil filter for the 1985 model, which was slightly different in design, a little bit smaller in diameter. So the old one, the one from previous, would not fit. I could try it all day; it would not go on. The new one would. So I had to know that. That is why model years it's one of the things that made model years become important. So where we are now is models are now run on a timeline. I realize the lighting is changing. It's because of this window. I realize it now. So future reference, won't be doing it like this again. So the timeline we're on now is somewhere in a 6 to 8 year span. Most automakers conform to about a 6 to 8 year span for models. Year one, the model is introduced. It's all new, blah, blah, blah. Year two, it sees some minor changes maybe, usually content shuffling or special add-on trim levels or something are added. Sometimes those changes are because of what was learned in that first year, mistakes that had been made in the design. Third year, they get some kind of light refresh, couple of changes, a little bit of a design look, maybe they change the bumpers, maybe they use different door handles, something. Little things change to make the car look slightly different and upgrade it a little bit, brings it into the fore. That's usually also when there will be a lot of upgrades to some technologies. So nowadays we have like infotainment, we have things like that. That's when a new upgrade will happen. Also, it's also common for that third year to introduce a new major trim level, so a new model for that model, like a hybrid or a sport package with a better engine, something like that. The fourth year is kind of like the second year. There will be no major changes. A couple of things shuffle around. That's it. Nothing major changes. Fifth year, this is probably when dealerships and most of the time through the manufacturer, so incentivized through the manufacturer, dealerships start incentivizing sales. Because at this point, the car is starting to get older in terms of the competition. So the competition might be introducing all new stuff, and they're still down here with this car that's 4 years old. So they'll start incentivizing. That's when dealerships are putting cash on the hood, they're matching down payments, that sort of thing. Sixth year, there will be more incentivization because the next year's all-new model will be announced. And so they're trying to unload current inventory before the new one hits. So there'll be heavier incentivization that year. And then the seventh year becomes the first year. That's when it's completely revamped, all new, blah, blah, blah. The years can change a little bit. Like I said, it's a 6 to 8 year for most models. It's a 6 to 8 year gap there, span there. So the year might change just back and forth a little bit. But overall, that's the hierarchy. That's the setup. That's the timeline run for most vehicles today. There are exceptions. There are some vehicles whose longevity is not based on being new. It's the sales stay steady. No reason, no incentive for the manufacturer to dump money into it and rebuild it. Great examples of that. Nissan Frontier pickup truck still sells like hotcakes. nothing but money in that truck for Nissan, and it's, what, 17, 16 years old at this point? It is really old, but it's still selling because, for a lot of reasons, there's no point in getting into it. But that's an exception to this rule. There you go. That's kind of the timeline we're on right now, and the reason we have model years for vehicles. It's a historical thing that, it's become tradition to use it. It's also become helpful because the little things that change maybe only on the mechanic's end, that only the guy in the shop needs to know, are designated by those model years. That's why manufacturers make a new model year. That's why they designate a model every year. But there you go. That's the answer I got. So this has been Aaron from AaronOnAutos.com. And if you have a question and you want to ask me, you want to know my opinion, you want to know how stupid I am, whatever, go ahead and ask it. Put it in the comments down there. Look me up on AaronOnAutos.com. You can find me on Quora as Aaron Turpin. So just on Quora, you can ask the question and then ping me and ask me to answer it. Whatever. I'm all over the place. You can find me on social media if you really want to stalk. Whatever it takes. But if you ask the question and I can answer it, I probably will. So there you go. That's what I got. AaronOnAutos.com. Talk to you again soon.